Hi, low friction peeps, welcome back. So today's episode is going to be on the key learnings from zero friction cycling's lubricant testing. So I've now done over 300,000 kilometers of controlled testing, which is a fair bit. It's taken a while to plow through that many chains and drivetrains on the test machines. Now, before I delve into that though, just for fun, so you may have seen on the last video and this one, same film day, is that I've got some cool new bits for my Aspero awesome gravel CX bike there. Completely unnecessary bling spend, but I couldn't resist. I've been working, I think, for about a year to get these cool cranks. So they are some cranks. So thank you to Christian from 81 Spices for hooking me up with the Ingrid cranks. They're just going to look super cool, so I can't wait to get them on. And in honor of that, I instead of my zero friction cycling top, I have the Ingrid top on. So I thought it was a bit boring anyway, wearing the same top every time. If you don't like change, don't worry, got the same shorts on. So all good. All right. Back to the key learnings summary. So from all the testing we've done so far, which have been going over 5 years now. I guess the data that we've sort of continued to build from all that testing has really helped to, I guess, hammer home, or I guess support the key points I try to hammer home a lot in my sort of latest news updates and Facebook and Instagram posts and so on. And just a quick big thanks also to Cycling Tips and Dave Rome for having me on recently on a Nerd Alert podcast to cover these key learnings. So if you listen to that Nerd Alert podcast, a fair bit of what I'm going to go through today will have been covered on that, but there'll probably be some extra bits that I'll be able to squeeze in on this one. And yeah, it's just, this is going to be really, so from all the testing, I guess the key takeaways for you and your drivetrain, pretty much whether or not you're racing, just want to look after your bike for your road riding, commuting, off-road riding, whatever it may be, really there's going to be I guess that's sort of the gold of the data in here, or the learnings in here for you. So I'm going to dive into, so key learning number one really is don't use wet lubricants if you ride off-road. So that may or may not have sort of clicked as fairly obvious for you. If it hasn't before now, hopefully it does. Really, wet lubricants and the world of dirt and dust. So as you're zooming through that stuff, every particle of dirt and dust that comes into contact with the wet lubricant chain, it is going to stick on contact and become part of that lubricant. So really, even the best wet lubricants, if we average sort of the data from like the top 5 wet lubricants that we've ever tested versus the top 5 non-wet lubricants that we've ever tested, literally the top 5 non-wet lubricants tested, which is, so your solid waxes, your UFO drip, your Silka SS drip and so on, their average wear rate is 10 times less versus the top 5 wet lubricants tested. And versus the, I guess, middle to not so great wet lubricants tested, they're pretty much a horror story. So a lot of people are really, you may be just taking a bit of a stab on your wet lubricant choice and heading out there riding off-road. And quite honestly, you could easily be in the 5 to 10 times greater or more wear rate of your drivetrain versus if you were going to one of the top non-wet lubricants and really the top wax chain coating type lubricant choices. So if for some reason you don't like a wax lube and you ride off-road, or a chain coating type lubricant, that's fine. At the end of the day, it's not my job to sort of tell you that you must do X. It's your choice, your drivetrain. Just, I guess, go into it with a little bit of at least the knowledge of, why, what the sort of the differences are, because a lot of people will think, it maybe isn't that big a difference. So I really like a wet lube. I'm just going to keep running a wet lube, and yeah, it might be a bit higher wear, and that's cool. I'm fine with that. So I think really trying to hammer home just how big a difference that is. And if you've got, especially if you've got an expensive off-road drivetrain, that cost to run versus the lowest wear choices, it's going to be pretty huge. And also those lowest wear choices, they're staying really low wear literally by the fact that they're not absorbing abrasive contamination. So your maintenance, or they are, but very, very slowly. So your maintenance of those lubricant choices is really so much lower. If you're going to try to maintain a wet lubricant as a fairly low friction lubricant choice riding off-road, the amount of maintenance in terms of sort of flush cleaning to get rid of the the abrasive lubricant that's now in your chain and replacing it with fresh non-abrasive lubricant, that's a lot of time, a lot of sort of solvent and degreaser costs to try to do that. And really, it's just a whole bunch easier not to have that contamination become part of your lubricant to start with. Just basically choose a better option, of which all that sort of data is up on the website. So, but if you must run a wet lubricant, then you want to run one that is the least wet. And the top choices that we've got there at the moment are Synergetic, Silka Synergetic, and Rex Black Diamond. So they're two of your sort of longest lasting wet lubricants anyway, and a part of them being, I guess, really super long lasting wet lubricants. A benefit of that is that really you need a very, very low amount of them to effectively lubricate your chain. They're less wet, so they attract less contamination less quickly. And so you've got, say, Synergetic at the moment, which I think is tested at the top at, I think it was 18.3% wear rate in the contamination block 2, whereas the average of all the wet lubes tested is around about 50%. So it's a pretty big gap, whereas we've got sort of a lower than 5% result for the top, non-wet lubricants tested. So pretty big gaps. If you're just taking a stab at it, you could be getting a whole bunch of wear, and there's a lot of wet lubricants that are marketed specifically for off-road riding, like Wolftooth WT1, which tested really poorly. I think I haven't got that handy in front of me, but that was somewhere around, I think, the 50% wear mark in that block, which is really high. So a lot of lubricants that claim that they clean as they lubricate, they don't. Or it's the loosest definition of clean that you've ever sort of managed to come up for yourself. So yeah, if you do ride off-road, really consider looking at the top non-wet lubricant choices. It will pay you back big time in your drivetrain cost to run, and also just stay a lot cleaner for a lot longer. So that is really key learning, I guess, number one, that the data on that is just so large and so clear that there's just simply no getting around that if the logic of stuff sticking to a wet lubricant hadn't really clicked in. And yeah, don't do anything like you may have seen with some of the muck-off lubes where they have a UV light for you wanting to make sure that all of the outside of your chain is covered in a wet lubricant. That is the worst thing, the worst way to go that you can possibly go. So if you've seen advice like that or had that put to you by a bike store that stocks muck-off lubes and with the UV light, just really, really don't do that. You want the least wet option possible off-road. All right, number two. So this one is my sort of famous zombie apocalypse that won't die, which is removing factory grease. So I think I did a video that really covered this off pretty well before, because there's still been so much information out there that conflicts with what mine and a number of others' data pretty clearly shows, and that is that factory grease is really not a great lubricant choice to run off-road, on-road, whatever it may be. So there has been some information out there. So there was for me, it's a sort of pretty infamous video done by GMBN, one of their tech videos, sponsored by KMC. They had that basically the number one mistake you can make for your chain is to remove the factory grease. That basically it's amazing stuff, and that you really shouldn't do that. And whereas really, I've got all the data that shows that leaving the factory grease on is really, really bad versus removing the factory grease and running a top lubricant choice. And again, it's really not even a close contest. So I tested factory grease. I tested a Shimano chain, which is actually probably the best factory grease, I think. Others are a lot worse, like SRAM, which is really sticky stuff. So they're at basically like 20% wear rate in block 1, and it sort of obviously gets sort of worse as we move into contamination, as opposed to with the top lubricant choices that we have tested. They're well under that sort of 5% wear rate mark and can stay under that 5% wear rate mark even when you move into off-road conditions. And the other thing with factory grease, so aside from having a pretty big sort of wear rate gap between the top known lubricant choices that you've got the option to run with those as opposed to factory grease, or leaving the factory grease on there. If you do that and then you move to one of these lubricant choices, most of them do not mix with factory grease at all, especially the wax type lubes or chain coating type lubricants. You're really trying to mix, say, like oil and water. You'll just end up with a gunky goop that's really not doing anything great. And especially if you spent some sort of fairly good money on a really top lubricant choice, so you spent $55 on a bottle of lube, be it SS drip or UFO drip, something like that, and you're applying that over the top of factory grease, you're just pretty much, sort of throwing your money away on that. It's going to be okay because there's still a great lube, but it's going to be pretty bad compared to if you remove the factory grease and then apply a top lubricant choice that is super low friction and stays super low friction. And the other thing as well, the reason why you want to do it basically from the gun if you can. If you're going to clean off the factory grease from a chain that's brand new, for most chains, so basically if you've got a YBN, a Shimano or a Campy, you're looking at basically 3 rounds of say 250 ml per round or per bath of mineral terps. And the last 2 baths of that you can keep for your initial bath on your next chain, so just keep it somewhere safe, and the other one you keep to properly dispose of. So that's a pretty low cost in terms of solvent because mineral terps is pretty cheap. And then you're looking at a couple of rounds of 250 ml of methylated spirits, and again that's very cheap, and you can use the second round as your first round for your next chain. So it's a really easy and cheap way to clean off the factory grease. And I've got all the instructions for that on the website in how to prep your chain for waxing or a top lube choice. If you ride a factory grease chain though, it will get really, really dirty really, really quickly. So you will go from basically needing sort of around 750 mils of mineral terps and 500 ml of methylated spirits, which you can use half of that at least for your next chain. So your total cost is very low. If you ride it, you're going to pump probably 3 to 4 litres of mineral terps through that chain before it's coming out perfectly clean. That's just how bad things get. So yeah, it's definitely just do it from the gun. Use hopefully the ZRC data to help guide your lubricant choice for your particular type of riding and preference. Run that lubricant choice and run it from the start. Get rid of the factory grease and move to that lubricant choice. So yeah, really trying to combat that. There's still too much sort of put out there by some channels that you shouldn't remove the factory grease. There's a myth. So the myth is basically that only at the factory, when they put this factory grease in, can the lubricant fully penetrate deep inside the chain. That once you remove it, when you reapply the lubricant, that you won't get the lubricant to penetrate deep into the chain where it's needed if you take that factory grease out. So now that's really completely untrue. Now some lubricants do have some fairly significant penetration issues, and they can often be some of your more traditional wax emulsion lubricants. So Squirt has it, Smooth has it, Grax has it, Absolute Black Graphene has it. In the case of Absolute Black, they recognise that, and they have instructions to do an immersive application with that lubricant once you've properly cleaned the chain, and that is great instruction advice. Squirt should say that too, so should Smooth, so should Grax. But you can negate those penetration issues to a point. I've got instructions on that on the website. But over time, they will get in there. However, those particular wax emulsion type lubricants aside, which are that lubricant type is a bit problematic for penetration issues. A lot of the latest generation wax lube stuff, so Silka SS Drip, UFO Drip, I'm testing currently now one from Effetto Mariposa. Terrible at saying their name, sorry. It's their new flower power wax. That has none. I mean, these lubricants get straight in there. So they get past the edge of the roller, they get past the gap between the inner plate shoulders and to the pin and disseminate across the pin. Absolutely no problems whatsoever. You apply them as per the manufacturer instructions. You have zero penetration issues. And so far, I don't think I've really seen a wet lubricant that has had a penetration issue. Wet lubricants, I mean, your chain, literally, it isn't that watertight at all. The gaps are pretty small and tough for some of those wax emulsion type lubricants. They're really, really easy to get through for most other lubricant types. So it is a complete incorrect myth that only at the factory, when they apply that factory grease in, can you fully penetrate the lubricant into the chain where it needs to be. Most lubricant types do that, no problems at all. And that shows up just so clearly in the test data. I mean, we look at now all the tests we're getting for lubricants that have extremely low wear in that block 1, where I have obviously stripped clean the chain and obviously just apply the lubricant as per the manufacturer's instructions, and we're getting extremely low wear, so like sub 5% wear rates, or even a lot of the time sub 10%. So that's showing zero penetration issues. When I've tested a chain with no lube, we had basically 80% wear. So 80% wear if there's no lubrication in there on the pin and inner plate shoulders, or sub 5%, there's no penetration issues. There's no issue. So it's a complete myth, and trying to really stop that myth being perpetuated. And it would be handy if channels that get 1 million views not to say stuff like that, or if they do and you watch those channels, can you please correct them and put comments on that sort of direct them this way? That would be great. All right, number 3, immersive waxing is still the lowest wear option. So that's a question I get a bit more and more these days, coming through just through inquiries. So a lot of great drip lube options now that we didn't have even sort of 2 or 3 years ago. And so a lot of people sometimes want to know, is waxing still the number 1 option? So yeah, it definitely is. So some of the top lubricants like your UFO drip and SS drip that have, I guess, formed that chain coating, and they're super low wear and they stay super low wear for ages. They're, obviously that's a sort of great sort of move forward for drip lubricants. But really I guess the one unassailable advantage that immersive waxing has is that, some contamination as you ride around on whatever lubricant you're using is inevitable. The chain is operating outside in the environment, exposed to, the elements. So some level of contamination is going to happen over time. It's really a matter for drip lubricants, how slowly is that contamination gathering going to occur? And at what point do you maybe need to step in with some level of maintenance to flush out what contamination is in there, and start again with now clean, fresh lubricant that's got no contamination as part of it. Immersive waxing really has that unassailable advantage that when you put it in the wax pot, the old coating melts off and it's now recoated in a fresh coating of solid super slippery wax. And that just brilliant reset of any contamination that's in there every time you re-wax, that's just basically, at this time, it's really nearly impossible for drip lubricants to try to match that. And without getting too super nerdy, I'll run through some just basic math. So, okay, yes, over time, the wax in your wax pot is going to build up with contamination, because some contamination is going to be imported into that wax pot, and it will become less and less amazing over, many waxes' time. But, you're starting with basically, say, 500 ml of wax. So now when we apply, say, an application of a wax lubricant over the top of our chain, or a wet lubricant, whatever it may be, let's say you're applying it to, most lubrication applications are going to be around about 3 mil, sometimes say 5 mil. Really heavy application for some lubricants is 8 to 10 mil. I'll pick 5 mil in the middle, and your chain is going to be over 100 links long. So pretty much everybody's is around 106, 108, longer for mountain bike, maybe shorter for some others. Call it 100 links, and it's a 5 mil application. Then it's basically 0.05 mil of lubricant being added per link of chain that's going on top of the old coating, which is going to have X level of contamination as part of it. So what you're doing when you're re-lubing is you're, I guess, improving the ratio of lubricant to contamination, by a bit. You're putting, say, 0.05 of a mil fresh lubricant on per link. And that ratio is going to continue to degrade over time, obviously, as you just keep putting more lubrication over and, re-lube. Compare that to, say, when you're putting it in a bath of 500 mil of, of wax. So yes, the wax will degrade over time as the contamination in it builds up. It takes a very long time for the maths of that to approach anything like what is happening on your chain with a drip lube if you just keep applying lube over the top without doing a periodic maintenance flush clean. So immersive waxing just takes the need to do any of that flush cleaning maintenance of your chain. You don't need the solvents, you don't need really anything. You just put it in the pot and re-wax. Old coating's melted off, new coating on, amazing super solid slippery coating of wax coating all parts of the chain. And so then for a period on your next coating, the chain metal's left out of the equation, there's no wear, it's all super low friction, and that's why still get the lowest wear rate results, especially in high contamination riding conditions for immersive waxing, because of that reset of the contamination every time that just can't be matched by drip lubes. So, and it's really just a matter of personal preferences, like, is immersive waxing going to suit you? Do you think it's going to be sort of this hard, faffy thing to do? In which case, go and have a look at, I think it's episode 4, where I sort of demonstrate how easy immersive waxing really is. And from there, you really weigh up, is that for me or is that not for me? Remembering also that now with these great drip lube options that we've got with, say, SS Drip and UFO, that you can immersive wax, re-lube your chain with those lubricants, say, the next 3 to 5 times, and then do an immersive wax to reset. They're immersive wax compatible lubricants. So if you're thinking that immersive waxing all the time is going to be a bit too much for you, you've got the option to do that sort of hybrid approach, and that's your next best. So really your best still is immersive waxing. Your next best is immersive waxing plus a wax compatible lube, and then third best would be to use one of those, just your top lowest wear lubricant choices. So yeah, long answer short, immersive waxing is still king. With the top, it has to be a top immersive wax. Obviously we tested AB graphene wax, that went really badly, very high wear from the gun. My theory is that wax was just too soft, and metal on metal was coming into play. The top known waxes, which at the moment are your M-Speed wax and your Silka Hot Melt, they just can't be beaten for long-term, just day in, day out, super low friction, super low wear. So it's really just a matter of, do those options suit you on your riding? So have a look at that video and weigh up which way is best for you to go. All right, number 4, if you ride in wet weather, you must reset the contamination in your chain. So now I say, I guess must. So now this is going to be, don't let me scare you or try to browbeat you into some really, really high maintenance regime here based on this. I guess my job here though, as Mr. Low Friction, is to try to convey to you as best as I can what happens really when you ride out there in the rain. Now, if we take a moment to think about it, your chain is working like a bat out of hell, like you're doing 40,000 odd, link articulations a minute, and you've got 8 sliding surface pieces of friction per minute in each articulation as all the chain parts move. They're under very high pressure load because they're pretty small parts. And so, I mean, this is a really, really extreme lubrication challenge. There's, even though it's just the humble bicycle and bicycle chain, even compared to, say, a lot of industry, I mean, you can have really high pressure, high temperature, lubrication challenges in a lot of, say, racing machines and industry and so on, but they have sealed environments and they have lubricants able to be made very specifically just for that, particular use case that they're being used in. Bicycle chain out in the wet, it's a really extreme, lubricant challenge because just all this crap is being thrown into your chain. So the trouble with once we get water in the mix is that water is the great medium. It runs right through your chain. So as I mentioned before, in the factory grease, your chain's just really not that watertight at all. Stuff will just run right through it. And you're hosing it really with dirty, gritty road water, just off the road, just hosing that onto your chain or off the trail. The water is going to bring that contamination right through your chain. So it's going to get into basically every part. And for most lubricants, it's simply going to just become part of that lubricant. And again, I'll refer back to lubricant claims that they clean as they lube. If you think that adding, say, 0.03 or 0.05 or even 0.1 of a mil per link of fresh lubricant over the top of your old coating, if you think that is doing a flush clean reset of your chain, then again, you've just got a really, easy and loose definition of what sort of constitutes as cleaning your chain. So it is not. You're just, by a very small amount, improving the ratio of contamination and lubricant until your next wet ride. So really, for most lubricants, there is some level of reduction when you do that. So there is some level of improvement, but by and large, if you don't step in and remove the contamination from the chain that wet ride has just trucked in, by and large, that's staying there. And your next rides, even if they're in the sun, they're going to be really high friction and really low wear. And so this is true for a lot of even, say, your top chain coating lubes, wax lubes. That contamination is going to be pressed in. It's part of that lubricant. It's effectively landlocked in there. It's really not going anywhere. And for wet lubricants, similar thing. It's become part of the lubricant. All you're doing by adding more is really improving the ratio that you've got of lubrication to contamination. So from here, so what do? You ride in the wet. This is where it actually gets a little bit, and I've got to be careful here because I could probably ramble on for 45 minutes just on this section, so I'm going to try to be concise for me. But it really comes down a lot to what is your lubricant choice and obviously sort of how often you need to do this. So again, to me there's a bit of a myth that immersive waxing is not suitable for wet weather riding because of the fact that if you ride in the wet weather with a wax chain and you come home and you park your bike and you come out the next morning and your chain will have started to rust and you think, well, that's pretty crap, this just doesn't work, it's not suitable. And that is true. If you ride in the wet with a wax chain and just park it and leave it, your chain will start to rust. So your rollers will be completely exposed to the air. Rollers oxidize pretty quickly. They're a high carbon steel for hardness, and high carbon steels will start to rust pretty readily. So if you're running an immersive wax or even a lot of wax lubricants, that will come off the outside of the roller first. So you just basically, your job is you simply have to take care of that when you get home. So you just don't leave it. So if you can pop the chain off and stick it in the pot and turn the pot on, then job done. And now, if it's going to be tight for you to get that re-wax done before your next ride, so especially if you're commuting and every day is going to be wet, just run 2 chains, run 3 chains in rotation. Personally, I don't see the point. If you're running 1 chain, hammering it all the time in wet weather conditions riding, you are going to, even on the best lubricants, you're obviously going to have a relatively short lifespan on that chain. It's just being hammered in really tough stuff. So you can either try to battle, keeping on top of contamination with the 1 chain, that's going to have, X lifespan, depending on how well you do. Or, you're always going to need the next chain. So just pre-buy your next chain and have 2 in rotation and make it a whole lot easier to stay on top of resetting the contamination in that chain and keep them both really low friction, for the longest time. So having a couple of chains in rotation, if you ride a lot in the wet and you want to try to keep things reset, and especially say if you're immersive waxing, you can pop 1 chain off, put it in the pot, turn the pot on, put your other chain that's ready to go on the bike, and basically that's your job done. So you don't, sure, great, I've got hints and tips for boiling water rinses to remove some of the crap contaminated wax before it goes in the wax pot. You don't have to even bother with doing any of that because you're putting it in a nice bath of wax. Things are going to, versus what's happening with drip lubes in such conditions, putting it just straight into the wax every time, you're still going to stay amazing for so much longer doing that versus, just dripping more lube over the top by, hopefully that it's sort of fairly clear as to why it'd be a pretty big gap there. So to me, a myth to bust is that immersive waxing is not suitable if you ride a lot in the wet. It is just a matter of getting the system right, and that system to me is pretty obviously just, say, having a couple of chains if you're doing some decent miles and a lot of them in wet. It just makes it very easy just to rotate them. And the other thing with, say, running a couple of chains if you ride a lot in such conditions is that people get caught out all the time. So especially if you're, let's say even you're not waxing, you're going to stick with a drip lube. If you just run the 1 chain and you keep relubing with a drip lube, you may be trying to do some sort of maintenance with it to keep it low friction, you are still quite likely to rip through that chain pretty quickly. And people get caught out all the time. The harsher the conditions people ride in, the more likely they just get caught out so easily with that chain going past the 0.5% wear mark. And then the next new chain, they need to buy a new cassette to go with the new chain. And they've probably made some good progress to their chain rings as well. Why not just guarantee that you are going to get at least 2 chains through that lovely cassette, especially if it's a higher end one that's going to cost a lot of money, as opposed to risking just 1. Like to me, pre-buying 1 more chain and having 2 on rotation, whether you're immersive waxing or not, to me that's just a really smart way to roll. It's like, I can't see why you wouldn't. And so, all right, so let's say now we're not waxing, what do you do? So you might think, I can't stay on top of this and I don't want to risk my rollers rusting. I'm going to run a wet lubricant because I think wet lubricants are the best to ride in wet conditions. And you can get some pretty tenacious stuff. So the more tenacious the wet lubricant is that's going to adhere to your chain through a whole lot of water being thrown at it, just know that obviously the more tenaciously it sticks to the chain, the more tenaciously contamination sticks to that lubricant as well. So you're just going to really want to stay on top of your maintenance of that chain. So what do you do? So we're bearing now, hopefully I've sort of put into some context that really if you ride in the wet, if you don't take care of the contamination the water brings in, and it's going to bring a lot in, that you're going to pay the piper in 1 of 2 ways. 1, some time in maintenance to remove it, or 2, in friction and wear of your chain and drivetrain components. So what do you do if you're not immersive waxing and you're using a drip lube or a wet lube? Then on bike, these are my, so this is the new one out just from Silka. This is sort of the longer term one that's been out for a while, which I've always recommended, which is UFO Clean. They're not cheap stuff, but you can do a really good on bike clean. You spray the UFO Clean or the degreaser on the chain on the bike. Really, it's a matter of throughput. The more you put through, you've got to weigh up the cost. But you're going to flush out a good amount of, you basically just want to get that old lubricant flushed out pretty well, rinse it, dry it, and then put your, sort of fresh lubricant coating back over the top. Now, you can do it on bike. That's your easiest, cheapest, I guess, or time cheapest way of doing it. I'm personally always a proponent of off-bike, which again is why I sort of come down to multiple chains if you're doing this all the time. If you just get caught in the occasional wet, easy, just do that. If you're doing it all the time though, and you want a good reset, pop chain off, other chain on, you can put your chain in a bath of, mineral terps or another solvent that's a lot cheaper, shake it around, flush it through, give it a couple of baths. Again, you can usually save your later baths for the first baths of the next one. Keep that stuff for recycling. May sound like it's hard yakka and it may not fit. Maybe it is for you. It's hard yakka to get the chain off and put it through some baths. Some will find it really easy. You can get pretty quick and easy at doing this stuff. So when I can, I've got to do one of the tests that we've been wanting to do in collaboration with Cycling Tips is to actually do testing, so the wear testing on the different maintenance methods. So if we're running, say for instance, a wet lubricant and we're doing on-bike spray cleaning maintenance versus one of the clip-on chain cleaners, versus removing the chain and putting it through some solvent baths versus going the whole 9 yards and doing ultrasonic cleaning. What are the wear rate benefits for those different cleaning methods, and then correlating that with the amount of time and cost, product cost spent to do that method. That'll be really fun to do. I've really wanted to do that for ages but haven't been able to. But the wrap on this is basically, pick what you need to do, just understanding that if you don't do something, what you're going to sort of pay for in friction wear. And then from there, without me spending an hour on it, you've got to sort of decide, all right, what's my lubricant choice? Am I running 2 chains or 1 chain? What is my comfort method for doing some level of maintenance on this chain that fits my time and my confidence, be it on bike clean, clip-on chain cleaner, removing and putting through some agitated baths. Really, that's going to be up to you. But the key learning is that, really, holy Batman, if you don't stay on top of resetting your chain and you ride a decent amount in the wet, you're really going to pay for it. So just, take into account the extreme lubrication challenge that it is, because I don't think many really think about it in the context of just how harsh a challenge it is and how much wear is taking place, and how much you can avoid if you do stay on top of some maintenance. Alrighty, number 5. So we now have some amazingly long-lasting lubricants. So we do. So from the testing, what's been really exciting for the testing is that, over time we've come across some just truly brilliant products. So we've already seen over the last few years, products like the Silka SS Drip and UFO Drip, just how low friction and low wear they are, how clean they are, and how they can work in conjunction with immersive waxing. On the other side, we've actually had some really, really long-lasting wet lubricants come out. So Silka Synergetic was one. But recently, as you may have seen, so Rex Black Diamond is super long-lasting. That really sets some new records for outright longevity treatments. So that can, I think a lot of cyclists will get an easy 1,000 kilometres per treatment on road, possibly around 1,500 kilometres before they're really feeling like, okay, it's starting to go dry and I should reapply. Just really, really long-lasting stuff. And another one recently on test is also Revo Lubes, which I'll be, again, pretty shocked if people aren't getting sort of at least the 800k, possibly 1,000 Ks per treatment on road for that. And that can really suit. So if you're not into sort of the chain coating and wax and you really want to run a wet lube, and again, hopefully you're on a road rider, because wet lubes off-road, still not where I sort of tend to recommend. just some really great long-lasting options that if you are the type of person that wants to apply your lubricant very, very infrequently, then just check out, I guess, the latest test data and keep up with some of the latest testing that we're doing, because I guess as zero friction cycling is really sort of very established now as, I guess, sort of the independent test body, we're just getting, obviously part of why I'm flat out is just getting more and more requests for testing or booked in testing from manufacturers that believe they've got truly great products, because they've done a whole bunch of stuff on their own side. And so now we're sort of really starting to see these come through. So the manufacturers that typically book in with zero friction cycling, obviously, they're really confident in the product that they've got. And so we're just getting more come through that are just some amazing stuff, and it's getting pretty exciting what we're able to stock these days and recommend. So if you haven't seen those, check those out. All right, number 6, so not to underestimate the drivetrain cost to run difference between lubricants. So again, this is something that comes up a bit from time to time. Funnily enough, probably one of my favourite cycling media publications is Cycling Tips, and we've got had great support from Dave Rome and James Huang at Cycling Tips, especially for a lot of this testing, which has been brilliant. Funnily enough, though, they've a couple of the others in the Cycling Tips team, with Kaylee and Zach, they tend to really just not think that. So they've sort of put out or intimated out on a couple of the podcasts over time that there really isn't that much, difference between, like, why would you faff with immersive waxing or a wax lubricant that you might have to reapply more often? There's really not much difference, just basically more or less plonk on, whatever wet lube and away you go. So really, and they're not the only ones, so it does come up a fair bit. So really my role, obviously, as part of zero friction cycling, I've got all the testing, I've got all the data. The wear rate data that I get from the testing, I'm able to then model out in terms of cost to run. If you're using that lubricant, what you can expect, based on the testing for this lubricant versus that lubricant, because it's factoring in not only the cost of the lubricant itself, so it might be a $90 a bottle lubricant, or it might be a $50 a bottle, or it might be a $20 a bottle lubricant. So we've got the lubricant cost, but then how much of that lubricant do you use per application is obviously fairly important. How often do you need to reapply the lubricant is going to be fairly important as to what your, I guess, the cost of the lubricant is itself to use over, say, 10,000 kilometres. So for something like, say, let's take Synergetic, you're probably putting on like 1 mil, and same as Black Diamond, about 1 mil per application. And an application lasts a long time. A bottle's going to last you a long, long time. So the cost of the bottle's high, but say Rock and Roll Gold might be $15 a bottle, but you've got to put 10 mil of it on every time, and you rip through a bottle pretty quickly. So the lubricant cost per 10,000 kilometres is actually vastly cheaper for a lot of the higher end lubricants than it is your more run-of-the-mill stuff. And then when we factor in the wear rates on that, so when we factor in the wear rate of the chain, and therefore the chain costs, well, how many chains you're going to wear through in 10,000 kilometres, and therefore how many cassettes you're going to wear through per 10,000 kilometres, and then how much of your chain rings will you have used up in 10,000 kilometres and possibly need to purchase those. So we can model out, based on the wear rates, lubricant usage rate, lubricant cost, how much per 10,000 kilometres you can expect. Again, it's based on my testing. Your ride is going to be different, but it's going to be a like for like, one lubricant choice versus another, especially if you're using, say, a lubricant choice that's really high wear in dry dust conditions, and you should probably be using a lubricant choice that's not high wear if you ride in those conditions. Make a smarter lubricant choice. You can see the cost to run modelled out, and it makes it pretty clear, and the gaps are really, really big. So we're literally talking, between the top lubricants and even just mid-pack, even just running, say, an Ultegra group set on road, the cost to run difference can be, say, over $1,000 per 10,000 kilometres of riding. And that cost to run gap can be a lot larger yet again if you're also running a higher tier group set and you're riding off-road in the world of dirt and dust, and you're running a lubricant that absorbs contamination very quickly and becomes very abrasive, versus a lubricant that stays really, really clean and low friction because the contamination just basically bounces off. So you can quite easily then get, say, a $1,500 or $2,000 cost to run gap per 10,000 kilometres. So the key message on that point is that if anyone is intimating that the difference between, taking that little bit of time to get the lubricant choice right for your particular riding and maintenance versus a random choice or the wrong choice for your type of riding, it's really, really big. And so I don't know what you prefer to spend your $1,000 on or $1,500 on. Do you, prefer to spend it on, abrading through your drivetrain components and having to replace those? Or would you rather spend that money on that new kit that you cover, helmet, glasses, cycling shoes, gloves? There's just so much fun stuff to buy, awesome new cranks. That's much more fun to buy than replacing drivetrain components I could have not abraded through in short order by just simply making the right lubricant choice. All right, the best option for multi-day events and bikepacking and cycling holidays. This is one that comes up a fair bit more often these days. So again, this is a topic I could actually go on for ages on, so I'm going to try to keep this fairly concise because this is getting longish already. It's going to really come down a little bit to, is it on-road, is it off-road, is it going to be wet or dry? So if you have a look at the data obviously on the testing, so a lot of the lubricants now, especially the really long-lasting stuff, it may well easily be within your event, lifespan, that you can use that lubricant for that event, no problems, or you just simply pack that lubricant. If it's just dry conditions, you can just reapply at night and you're golden. So if you're immersive waxing, and you think your wax treatment's going to run out, you just use one of the wax-compatible lubricants like UFO drip or SS drip, and you are golden. So if it's dry, even if it's a long off-road event, it's it might be a multi-day, say 3 or 4 day off-road event. You're golden just to reapply that lubricant, and you're going to get through each stage and that event really low friction, really low wear. If it's really dusty, even if it's dry, it can help, like if it's a race and it's an important race, then it can help to pack a second chain. So if it's been pretty harsh stuff, then it's been really dusty and there will have been some dust penetration and some degradation to your lubricant performance, then popping a fresh chain on, at the halfway mark, so you do stage 1 and 2, reset that back to, now you're back to say a 3 or 4 watt chain because you're putting a super low friction, freshly prepped chain on your bike for stages 3 and 4. If it's like a 7-day stage race, then you might want to have another chain again. It all depends on your budget, how serious you're going to take it, and so on. This question really only gets fun or more tricky to weigh up if it's wet. So if you're expecting that it's going to be wet, be it road or off-road, that's where it gets really tricky. So what do you do? So you're going to really, take into account what we were talking about before. Water is going to bring in all that contamination. It's going to become part of the lubricant. And it's pretty much going to stay there unless you are able to remove it. So you can just re-lube and away you go. But how long do you want to keep doing that? So 3 days deep, your chain is going to have increased in its efficiency losses and its wear rates by quite a bit. There's just no getting around that if you're riding in harsh wet conditions. So do you want to pack something to do some sort of whatever cleaning level you can whilst you're during the event and re-lubing? Or again, my advice is, as always, pack fresh chains. So if you know it's very likely to be wet, having a fresh chain there, that even if you do day 1 and day 2, just with a re-lube after day 1, and then go to a fresh chain for day 2 and day 3, that's a lot better than hammering the same chain again by day 3 and day 4, because that's when it's going to be really starting to struggle. If you start day 3 with an 8 watt chain because of the contamination, and you started day 1 with a 4 watt chain, it just gets obviously worse and worse, and you're just kicking off the day in not a great spot when you could kick the day off going back to, say, a 3 to 4 watt chain if you're starting with a fresh prep chain. So it's one of those things where for me, and I might be different because I'm a bit more, I am Mr. Low Friction, so I sort of tend to take the lowest friction path where possible. But to me, it is still a bit of just the smartest way to roll with a multiple chains approach. To me, you're always going to need another chain. If you've got these sort of chains there that they're then just going to move over into your, you're going to need another training chain sooner or later. Typically, people who are, doing these multi-day events and races, you're usually clocking up some decent amount of training time. You're going to need another chain. Don't stress about pre-buying another chain or two to make sure that you get through this event really well. You'll use them, so don't stress. And if you upgrade bike to a different speed bike, you've got chains to sell to whoever you're selling your bike to, so it's all good. All right, and linking to that, which I've covered before, if you do race, having a dedicated race chain is a very smart way to go. I'm not going to really hammer on here due to time, but in a nutshell, it doesn't make any sense to rock up to a race on the same chain that you've just hammered out your last 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers of training on. They do drop efficiency over time as they wear, and especially as they become more contaminated. Surfaces can become compromised, especially the low friction coatings of the chain. So having a dedicated race chain that you use for race day and a dedicated training chain, and then all you need to do is just, again, pre-buying one chain. When your training chain reaches 0.5 wear or getting close to, your dedicated race chain moves over to be your training chain, and you get one chain as per normal to be your dedicated race chain. So regardless of what lubricant option you're running or whatnot, just having a dedicated race chain if you race and a dedicated training chain, it's just a really, really smart way to go. You may have heard even back from the Friction Facts days and some others that have said, if you're going to race, just clean your chain. You'll get 3 watts just by cleaning your chain. So this sort of takes it that step further. You're going to get probably 5 watts. If you're just running a whatever drip lube and hammering away training and then going to a kept mint race chain, it also makes it really easy to keep that chain mint in between races because you've got the time. So it's like hammering away in your training chain there. Maybe you don't get around to doing any maintenance on that. That's cool. Just look after your drivetrain by not letting it run too long. Your race chain, it does make it easy post-race. Flush clean that chain, re-lube it with whatever it is you're using as your race lube, and it's mint again, ready for your next race. It's, if you race or do events, why you wouldn't have that? You don't need to get a fully optimized race chain. They're a bit faster. They cost a lot more to get that little bit faster. So really that's just for the most avid that want to pay an extra, well over $100 to get the full race treatment, to get another sort of half a watt to a watt extra speed for a full race chain versus just having a dedicated race chain. So most riders, you don't need to go that path. It's just go the smarter path with dedicated race and training. Alrighty, and so last bit on this one, nice key learnings is, and this just really because it's coming up more and more all the time now, is that if you're riding an e-bike, most especially, this is focused on Emtb, then you're going to eat through drivetrains unless you're very, very careful. So yeah, I'm going to focus really, yes, if you're e-road, but it's really much more, Emtb is much more prevalent. And again, it's a really extreme lubrication challenge when you're riding with really high power and torque out in the world of dirt and dust. And if you're it's still probably most common for Emtb riders because just the MTB demographic that they have a tendency towards wet lubricants, which is really, as per the top one, it's not your best friend in the world of dirt and dust. So if you've got wet lubricant, dirt and dust, high power, high torque, drivetrains are going to be eaten in pretty short order, and they are eaten in very short order, and that's pretty costly and wasteful. So the advice for Emtbs is, number 1, stay away from wet lubricants for a start. Get onto a chain coating lubricant or immersive waxing in conjunction with a chain coating lubricant. You're going to, cut your wear rate down by about a factor of 10 just for a start by doing that versus whatever random choice wet lube you're running. The key though is that the harsher the conditions and the higher load, that will shorten treatment lifespan of whatever lubricant choice you're using, which hopefully sort of makes fairly sense. The more sort of stress the lubricant's under, the shorter the lifespan it is going to have. So already one of my key hints and tips for, say, immersive waxing and the chain coating lubricants is don't push treatment lifespans as much as possible. What you want is all parts of the chain to be sliding on a super slippery solid coating of chain lubricant and keeping the chain metal out of it. And also not having abrasive contamination pressing through and onto your chain metal. So the thinner you let the chain coating get, the more time and the more space dust has to get off the trail and inside your chain and get pressed into that wax coating and get pressed through and abrading on your chain metal. So if you keep a really good coating on there, and you do that literally just by re-waxing early, by re-lubing with a chain coating lube early, you're sort of, one, you're keeping that coating in a really good spot, and 2, it minimizes the ability of the dust to get in the spaces and get sort of deeper into the chain. So if you would say normally, for instance, do a re-wax every, say, 8 hours on your normal mountain bike, and you've got an e-mountain bike, I recommend to re-wax by like 4 hours max. So cut it in half. If you can do it even more often. And then if you re-waxed every ride, and again, this is where, say, multiple chain approach may come in handy. The extension you get in your drivetrain lifespan is enormous. If you did that on road, you would have a chain for life and basically a drivetrain for life. Emtb, there's still going to be somewhere because of the power and torque and the conditions, but it is going to be a massively extended lifespan. You can't really re-lube necessarily, every ride with the chain coating lubes. You will get a build-up over time, and so you have to do a bit more maintenance to keep it under sort of control. But definitely erring on more frequent. So if you would normally sort of reapply Silka SS drip or a UFO drip, or if you're using Smooth or Squirt or whatever it may be, whatever you might have normally expected to do for your particular type of riding off-road. And again, it varies because not all dust is equal, which I'll touch on in a sec. But basically you want to cut that in half or more. You're better off dealing with over-application for Emtb, so dealing with a bit of build-up of the lubricant versus dealing with the wear that can come into place if you're pushing treatment lifespans and letting them get too thin. Now, what it is for your riding in your area, it is going to vary a bit. Like, no dust really is created equal. There's some just soil, clay dust that are quite non-abrasive. And then there's, like, where I live across the road from a quarry. So if I do a lot of training at Eagle, that dust is more abrasive. It's rock dust. It's going to eat through my wax coating much faster than riding on some lovely soil hard pack. So your conditions, your riding, your treatment lifespans are going to vary a bit based on that. The key advice is, if you're just running a random choice, especially wet lube, and you've probably already noticed you're eating through drivetrains. If you want to stop eating through drivetrains, get onto a lubricant choice that has really, really low wear to start with for off-road conditions. Really halve the treatment lifespan that you would do for an analog bike if you're riding an e-bike, and do whatever maintenance you need to do if it's just reapplying a lube to stop the gunk up. And the other thing, consider multiple chains, because again, if you're just applying a lubricant, what can often happen is, and it's definitely more the case with wet lubricants as opposed to your chain coating lubricants, see this on road as well, much more common off-road. Let's just say you're applying a wet lubricant and you're riding, you apply more and you're riding, you're just applying as needed. What's happening is that for, say, the first half of your chain's life, you might do a wear check after a month of riding and things look not bad. The wear rate in chains in such cases is nowhere near linear. So to start with, the lubricant doesn't have as much abrasive contamination in it as it's going to have in the second half of its life. And also whatever wear protection coatings the chain had at the start will be gone for the second half. So you'll typically get a relatively, maybe not bad looking wear rate to start with, and then a very rapid ramp up in the second half of the chain's life, as now the lubricant that's running in the chain can be a lot more abrasive than when you started, and you've lost those protections. And so people get caught out all the time. They check chain wear, at X time, and things look pretty good, and they check about the same time later and it has ripped past the recommended replacement mark, and they need a new cassette and they need a new chainring, and it's just, again, it just costs a lot of money and it's very, very wasteful. And just that little bit of knowledge and a little bit of attention on it and understanding what's happening and why can just save you a fortune. And again, for an Emtb, if I was me, I don't have an Emtb, I no doubt will one day, I would be running a couple of chains on rotation if that was my sort of bike that I rode a lot, literally just to make sure I saved or guaranteed that I got 2 chains through that cassette. And it makes it much easier, again, especially if I'm waxing, which no doubt I would be, or wax plus a compatible wax lube, to stay on top of those re-wax or re-lube intervals that I'm not pushing those treatment lifespans. So may sound a bit sort of superfluous or a bit faffy, but really it's what's easier. Just staying on top of that little bit of advice and knowledge of re-wax early, run a couple of chains, or is it low maintenance for you to, for the second half of, not too long into your riding on your Emtb, you have a pretty crappy running drivetrain that you then take to a bike store and get, basically all the running gear replaced. I think it's just easier just to do something really sort of simple hints and tips that just save so much wear and so much cost. So yeah, just wrapping up on that one, because definitely more and more as e-bikes become, much greater penetration, which is great, getting more people out cycling. A lot of it's off-road. They're just eating through their drivetrains, and the big part of what you want to do is trying to reduce that. So yeah, hopefully that helps a little bit. All right, so yeah, sorry, as per normal me, would be fairly long. There was probably really no way that me doing key learnings wrap from 5 years of sort of testing, that it wasn't going to be, covering off a bit of stuff. So yeah, if you're looking for a short video from me, sorry, I disappoint you again. I'm not sure when a short one will be coming on. I will try one day to put out a short one, but this is me for the moment. So yeah, hope you found that information and advice useful for you in your type of riding, and that if you're ever unsure, if I haven't hammered a point home enough, again, the data is all there. The wear rate data, the cost to run data is all there on the Zero Friction Cycling website. We've got by far, I guess, the most accurate and most comprehensive sort of cost to run modelling. There's no one else doing testing is doing any cost to run modelling based on that testing. So you can see for you, on your lubricant choice for your type of riding, how that's going to pan out for you. So lubricant A might be brilliant in road, but you take it off road, and your cost to run is going to rapidly go up because it's just not suitable for off-road riding. That sort of stuff is going to hopefully really help you just make the right choice for the lubricant that suits you and the maintenance for that lubricant that suits you. And yeah, just making some getting the cogs turning about, especially if you ride in some really harsh conditions all the time, what's going to be your approach? So there was for me anyway, no real concise, easy way to say, just do this, just do that, because I can say just do immersive waxing and run 3 chains in rotation, job done. You'll have super low wear in all your wet weather conditions riding. That's just not going to suit you, and you need to run a wet lube, in which case have a ponder on that information I sort of put forward about what's happening. Hopefully that clicks, and think about what's going to be your sort of best strategy for you that's going to help you just reduce all that wear, save a bunch of money, use that money to buy much more fun cycling stuff like I do, as opposed to abrading through my drivetrain. So yeah, it's a more fun way to go. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and other YouTubey type things, like share with your friends. So that'll keep you up to date with the latest low friction news and hints and tips. And yeah, also put any comments down below, and I can try to look at those and take them into account for future episodes.